Hello composers, and welcome to Reaper. Reaper, if you've never used it before, is a DAW, a digital audio workstation. And simply what that means is it allows us to work with audio in some way. So we can import audio, or we can record audio files in, and we can organize them somehow. We can cut them up, we can chop them, we can stretch them, we can mix them and remix them, we can apply effects, we can do all sorts of things. Really, a DAW is the kind of central toolkit for the electronic composer. So really, this whole semester we're going to be working with and learning the ins and outs of a DAW and how it allows us to work with sound, how it allows us to compose with sound. Now this semester we're going to be working with Reaper. I like Reaper for a few reasons, but the biggest is that it is cross-platform. That means anyone can use it if you're on a Mac, if you're on a PC, if you're on Linux, and it is quite cheap. You can download it and you can use it for free. You can pay for a license. I think it doesn't cost very much. We have licenses on the university computers in the music department, so you can use it there. Or if you want to just play around with things, try things out at home, you can download it on your computer, your laptop, whatever, and it should run fine. So first things first is presumably you have Reaper downloaded. We're going to open it up and we're going to dive in. Some of you will have used a DAW before. Maybe you've used Logic or Cubase or Pro Tools or Ableton or something like that, and others won't have ever seen anything like this, and that's absolutely fine. The plan today is to get everyone up and running and kind of all building confidence and building a familiarity with using a bit of software like this. Now, if you have used one before, a lot of this will seem familiar. Fundamentally, kind of all DAWs work in the same way. They allow us to see sound over time. That's going to become a little bit more obvious in a minute when we bring in some sound files, but really a lot of these skills are transferable. So once you've kind of played around with one of these things, the other ones should make sense. Now, I have opened Reaper, and the first thing that I want to do is I want to bring in an audio file just to make it clearer how this thing works. Now over here I've got a bunch of audio files. I've put these on Minerva, so you should be able to access them and download them, just so you've got a bunch of things that you can try. I'm just going to drag this file in, and when I do that, let's get rid of this. When I do that, you'll see that all of a sudden we have this waveform. Okay, now I can zoom in on that a little bit. Now, a waveform, for those of you that don't know, is showing amplitude over time. It's a graph. That's all a waveform is, really. So amplitude meaning like loudness. Okay, so we see here that we have, let me zoom in, focus in a bit more. You'll see that we're going to have on this sound, this is someone hitting a tam-tam, a cymbal. We're going to have a loud sound that gradually over time gets quieter. Now let's have a quick listen. There we go. That should make it fairly obvious kind of how this waveform is represented, how it works, and it's useful as we start working with lots of different kinds of sounds. We can learn a little bit about their behavior by reading that waveform. Now, what we see then is over time we have amplitude laid out. Notice that it doesn't tell us anything about frequency or pitch. It's not going to work like a traditional score in that sense. You know, we see the 5-line stave and we see dots on it representing pitch. We've got none of that. All we've got is amplitude. All we've got is loudness, right? So that's going to be slightly different if you've never worked with something like this before. But also it does make it very easy for us to see when things are happening and kind of compare them in that way. So I've loaded up a new file, I've dragged in an audio file. First thing that you should probably do when you bring in a sound file though is save your project. Okay, we want to get used to saving our work as we go, because one of the worst things that we can encounter as electronic musicians is coming up with something absolutely amazing, it sounds great, everything is perfect, and your computer crashes or your laptop runs out of battery and we've lost all of our work. So let's get into the habit right from the start of saving our project, and just every now and then we're going to hit Control S. I'm on a Windows today, but you might be on a Mac. It's Command S if that's the case. Just keep saving your files. Make sure it's backed up. Really, really important habit to get into. Okay, so at the top of my screen, you'll see running along here we have this essentially a ruler. We've got a clock running along the top. Now at the top we've got bars and beats, and below that we've got time. Okay, so 4 seconds, 8 seconds, 12 seconds, and so on. Now we can change this. Measures and beats, that's not really going to help us as kind of composers of electroacoustic experimental music, where we're not working to meter, right? So I'm going to get rid of that. I'm just going to change this to minutes and seconds, because that's what's going to help us. We're going to be working with time. Now, on the same token, I also don't need this grid anymore, because we're going to work outside of general kind of, tempo and things like that. So to do that, I'm going to go to Options, Snap Grid. I'm going to disable snapping, Options, Show Grid, and I'm going to turn off Show Grid. Okay, this is going to be a little bit more helpful for us later on. Now, I've got this sound. There's a lot of silence in this sound, so we can move things out. Now, one thing to note is, probably maybe one of the most basic but fundamental things about a DAW is it allows us to move sound in time. Now this seems really banal, but look, I can drag this around and I can move it. So this here, the sound starts after 10 seconds. Let's make another copy. I can copy and paste this sound, right? I can bring it in and we can have another one here overlapping. I can do this a bunch more times. And all of a sudden, we've got more kind of copies of this sound that I can move around. We can play them back. So when we start to work with sound as these kind of objects, right? Objects that we can move around, that we can copy, we can paste, we can change. Hopefully that kind of gives you the idea that this can be really, really malleable. This can be really immediate, and it can be really powerful for like changing all of these things. If you've just worked with a score before, where you're placing something on a grid, on a stave, and you can't necessarily just play back and hear it immediately, and moving things around is a little bit more cumbersome maybe. Here we can really just get in and drag things around and kind of arrange things as we want them, and then we can hear them. It's immediate. It exists in a state of actualization where we can just go in, press play, and listen to the piece, and that is the piece. We're not waiting to give the score to a performer. The performer learns the score, the performer plays the score back, we sit and we listen to it. No, it's all happening right here in our DAW. And that's really, really exciting for us as composers. It means we can really kind of build up a relationship to our material. But I'm getting carried away. Let's get rid of all of this. Let's just delete that. Let's go back to our sound. Now, I've already kind of given the game away a little bit, but I want to show some basic controls, some basic ways that we can manipulate our sound. So I've dragged in my sound file. It's a tam-tam. It's being hit. Now, you'll notice if you look at the mouse, as I move the mouse around over different sections of this object, the mouse icon changes. And what that's meaning is that we have lots of different operations that we can do. We can do different things to our sound depending on where we touch the mouse over the object. Now at the end, I've already done this one once. You see here, this mouse object changes. I can drag a sound in and I can crop it. Okay, I can do the same thing at the start. So let's listen to our original sound. But I can make it shorter. right? And it just ends there. I can also crop it in from the start, and we could just have a tiny little fraction of our sound now, right? And all I've done there is I've just cropped in. It's still there. It still exists. It hasn't gone anywhere. I've just cropped it out. Okay. So you could see all of a sudden we could take this and we could copy and paste it a whole bunch of times. Just that little fraction. Now here I'm just doing Control C, Control V. You know, just like when you're typing in Word and you do Control copy and paste or something like that. Let's listen to that. Whoa. Now, okay, that's not the most exciting rhythm in the world, but that's a pretty powerful change from our original, right? From this. It's still there. Okay, that's kind of cool. So we've just cropped in and we've done some copying and pasting. And you could crop in multiple times, you could do different things. It's kind of interesting. Now, I should note, what we're doing here as we edit these sounds, this is called non-destructive editing, right? So I can Control Z to undo things, okay? I haven't fundamentally changed that sound file, that original sound file that I dragged in. That's really useful to keep a note of. So anything that you do in Reaper at this stage, we haven't changed the original sound file. Okay, we've just manipulated it, we've just done things to the sound, but the original sound is still there. Okay, so we can go back to that if we need to. So here I'm just doing Control Z to get us back there. So this mouse icon was the crop. Okay, we can crop in at the start or at the end. Now what else can we do? So this one at the top, in the top left and top right hand corner, this is going to allow us to fade our sound. Okay, now here's where it's really obvious. If I drag this in, we get this nice red curve, and you'll see that the waveform changes, right? So instead of it being this big attack, you know, we have this loud sound at the start and then fading out. Here it's much smoother. Okay, I've smoothed it out by fading in. So this is, again, read it like a graph. I'm fading in the volume over time. Okay, as we read through, the volume will increase. Let's listen. Okay, it's most apparent right at the start there. Let's listen to it again. And without. It's quite a big change in the overall sound characteristics of that sound, right? It's gone from being a very aggressive, abrasive sound to having a much smoother quality to it. Now, interesting, a lot of the kind of identity of a sound exists in its attack, right? So one of the interesting things, you know, thinking back to last semester working with instruments, if you record a clarinet but you remove the kind of first attack of the sound, the articulation of the sound, if you were to fade in, it becomes quite difficult to identify that sound. And in fact, that's true of a lot of sounds. By removing the attack, we can kind of hide the source of the sound. Lots of composers have kind of made that a big feature of their work. I'm thinking of particularly of composers like Phil Niblock, Sarah Davachi, who work with building kind of big droning sounds by recording acoustic instruments, but by fading in or cross-fading the attacks of these sounds, we're left with these instances of sounds where we're not really sure what they are. Are they synthesized? Are they acoustic? You know, where does one breathe? It's a really interesting, very simple effect, but it can have really really profound results in our sound. Now, because this sound fades out so slowly, fading out is not really going to make much of a difference, but it can be helpful if we've already cropped in, right? So whereas before this sound might sound like, you know, it's a sharp attack and then cut off. So let's listen without fades. That's something, a fairly abrupt start and end. Let's fade it in and fade it out. Much smoother. Okay, by fading in, by fading out, we've lost those kind of abrupt start and stops. So that's interesting. Okay, so already just a bit of fading in and fading out. Let's do the same thing that we did before now. Let me just let me do this. Let me copy and paste this sound. Let's build up some layers again. I should zoom out here. I should say I'm trying. As you use a DAW like Reaper, you'll start to learn some of the keyboard shortcuts, and I am trying to avoid doing some of them. So I should. There we go. I can do copy and I can do paste here, so I'll do that. And paste again. What about up here? Let's paste this. So what I'm trying to do here is I've taken that sound, I've faded in, faded out, and now I'm going to build up a layer of them. Let's see how that sounds. Maybe not quite dense enough to cover, you know, we can think of a way of covering the start and end of these. But maybe that takes a few more attempts to do that well. Oh, actually, I tell you what, you know what? Just to prove the power of copy and paste, let's take these. I'm going to do. Let's do the. Let's do it again. Oh God. It's going to be like a very strange delay effect. Let's see what we have here. Interesting. Now, we've still got that attack, even though we faded in the start. Because of the nature of the original sound, we're still left with quite a clear articulation on the note. So, sorry, might be worth trying to kind of play with that. Let's go back to our original. Well, let's crop it back out, crop it here, and fade it again. Now, actually, to show you the next thing, I want a different sound. Let's get rid of this for the moment. We can always bring it back in. What should we bring in? Let's bring in this cello. Here we go. We have a shorter note. Now, I've already shown you one way of kind of doing this with copy and paste, but by default, Reaper will, at the end of the sound file, at the end of the object that you dragged in, it will just loop it, right? So what I can do now, if I crop outwards, right, past the end of the track, it will just play it again. And so I can do this and just drag it all the way out, and I can make a sound repeat. Okay, so it's very simple, but it's quite handy sometimes in some instances, particularly if you're working with something that you want to form a repetition of. I'm thinking of Pierre Schaeffer, who said that repetition musicalizes a sound, right? So we hear something once and it's a sound, we hear it again and it's a rhythm. So, you know, we can really make use of this idea of repetition in interesting ways, you know, and in a DAW, whether that's looping or whether that's copy and pasting a sound, copy items, paste items, do it again, you know, we can do some interesting things. Okay, I'm going to have a quick look at a couple more ways to simply work with sound in Reaper. So we've looked at the different ways that we can use the mouse tool, the cursor, to do different things. So we can crop sounds in, we can loop them out, and we can fade them in, and we can fade them out. The really kind of one that becomes quite important, but it's often overlooked, is splitting a sound up into pieces. So at the moment I have got a new sound here. This is just me playing a wine glass, right? So it's a sustained kind of drony sound. Now, we have this sustained sound, but what if we want to break it up into smaller pieces? Now, if I click around, you'll see this green cursor moving. We call this the playhead because it shows us where we're going to play in the sound. There. So if I click around it, let's say I want to split the sound somewhere. So if I right click all the way at the bottom, split items at cursor. This is where we start to get quicker at doing things if we learn the keyboard shortcut. So you see here the keyboard shortcut is S, right? So here, if I click here, if I press S, you'll see that now we've split that sound file, right? This region becomes a new one, okay? And that's kind of useful because now we can start to click and press S, click and press S, and we can start to move the sound, right? So for instance, in this sustained sound, I can now break it up and I can kind of add silences, or I can move things around a little bit more. Now you can imagine maybe you're recording a sound that is a bit more rhythmically interesting and we could break that up and do some things with it, but let's listen. So now I can break up the sound, and potentially I could even reorder it then, right? So I take this back from back here, move this over here, bring this over, I can crossfade them, so you'll notice that if I just drag it over, we get those fade lines again that we had before, but they're balanced, so we're cross-fading things. So we fade one sound out as the next one fades in, which is quite nice. So now we're playing it in a different order, but we've used that fade to kind of smooth over the sounds and make it a bit less obvious that we've done it, which is kind of powerful. That's a pretty drastic sound change that we've kind of smoothed over. So now that we can splice up and potentially reorder our sounds, we can, kind of semantically kind of change the meaning of our sound. So here I've got
1, 2, 3, 4.
Just a recording of someone counting, but potentially this is someone counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But we could splice it up quite easily here and change the number order. So potentially we could count backwards, right? So instead of it being 1, 2, whatever this is, we can count down just by changing the order. And now this means something else, right? Instead of someone counting upwards,
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
They're counting down. We can change the speed that they count by spreading things out.
3, 2, 1.
And that has
3.
fairly radical kind of consequences for how we can change and use the sound material that we're working with. And again, these are really, quite basic tools, okay? It might take a little while to get your head around using them, but fundamentally we're just chopping sound up and moving it around in time. We could do some really interesting things here. Imagine this was like a recording of percussion, and we can change the way in which it runs. Again, the kind of archetypal example of this would be the breakbeat, right? Taking a drum sequence, a 4-bar fill, chopping it up, and then all of a sudden you've got the kind of component sounds of a drum kit that you can then re-sequence in any way that you want, right? That's the birth of drum and bass. So we have some really, really basic ways of editing sound. Now I just want to have a quick think about how we kind of work with these sounds in the DAW environment as a whole, how we mix them. Okay, so we've done some editing. Now let's look at some mixing, right? Some balancing of audio, thinking about how we hear the sound files that we've got. Now I've got 2 audio files here. The top one is a recording I made with a hydrophone of some water, and the bottom one is the wine glass recording. Okay, so I'm going to play both of them at the same time. Now, there are going to be times when you're working with your sounds and you need to quickly isolate or stop another sound from playing, just so you can focus on what you're listening to. So for instance, let's say I just need to listen to the water for a minute. Now up here we've got an M and an S button, right? Solo and mute. Now, where we've only got 2 tracks, soloing one is the same as muting the other. So let's just have 2 copies of this track for the moment. So I've got 2 of this water, but it could be anything, and 1 here. Now, if I solo a track, it's going to mute out all of the other tracks. So I'm only hearing that. Let's move these out of time. But if I mute a track, it will stop that track playing, but it will let me hear everything else. So there might be instances where you've got a bunch of different sounds and you just need to focus on one track, so you can solo that track and just listen to that. Other times you'll have a whole bunch of sounds and you want to listen to all of them minus one track, so in which case you might mute it. Now I should say, just because I haven't explained it very well, these going horizontally are tracks, right? And we can have multiple sounds on a given track, right? We can have, let's go back to just 2 minutes. We could have both on one track. Okay, so we've only got one track and we've got different sounds, and it could be any sound. I could have multiple copies of it on that track, or we could have on 2 tracks. Now, for instance, that would allow us to overlap sounds, right, which we couldn't if they were just linear one after the other. Okay, so so I'll try and be better at saying track when I mean anything on this row, and sound or sound object when I specifically mean, you know, one of these waveforms. Okay, so this is a sound here, this is a sound here, or an object or a region in other bits of software, but I'll try and make that a bit clearer. Now, so we can mute a sound, we can mute a track, and we can solo a track, and you'll see down here I've got this mixer. It's supposed to look like kind of the old mixing desks of yore. Your setup might be a little different when you open Reaper, because you can, if I go into view, I can have this docked or undocked, and I can have it as a separate window. For instance, if you have 2 screens or something, you can have the mixer showing up separately, which can be quite useful. So I can undock it and have it up here as well, which I don't want, and I've forgotten how to get it back to normal. Oh dear. There we go. So when I play my sound, and again, I should have said I'm just using the space bar to press play, but you'll see I have these meters, these green meters, that are showing me, like the waveform, they're showing me the loudness, the volume that we're listening to the tracks on. Now let's say I want to hear both of these tracks, but I want one to be much louder than the other. So I can change the gain, I can change the volume by using these sliders. So let's say I want the sound of that water to be very, very quiet, and really we just want to be focusing on this. So what I'm going to do, when I'm going to play, I'm going to drag this down. It's still going, but I can make it much quieter, so it's not quite as present. Similarly, I can change it around. So you'll see this control is in decibels, so at the moment that wine glass sound is minus 16 decibels, so it's much quieter. Or I could drag it all the way down, so it's quiet. Now, later on in another session, when you've got a bit more used to all of these controls, because I realise I'm throwing quite a lot at you, we'll look at ways that we can automate this, so we can have the software do the volume changes and other things like that for us, which could be really, really handy. Okay, I know that I've thrown a lot at you, particularly if you've never used a DAW before. This might all seem quite overwhelming, so I won't go into too much detail. I'll let you explore this more in your own time, but I just want to leave you with one final thing. In the mixer, you see there are these slots on the different tracks, right? So this is track 1, this is track 2, track 1, track 2. So let's just have a listen for a second. I'm going to delete that wine glass. Let's get rid of that. Let's just focus on this water track now. Now we have these slots. Now these are effect slots. So I'm going to click this and it's going to open a new window. And here it's going to give me lots of audio effects, right? Now you can, if you've not used these before, you can broadly think of these a bit like the effects pedals that you have for like guitar or bass or something like that, and they'll all do different things. Now these ones, these are VST effects. Now let's have a quick look. Let's just click on, there we go, there's a delay here. I'm going to click add. Now when I do that, I'm going to get a new little window pop up, and this is going to be all the different controls for an audio effect. Now sometimes the default settings are not great, and sometimes they are. So let's have a quick listen just to this. Oh, we've got a delay effect there. Okay, maybe that's not the most helpful sound to work with. Let's just bring back our piano sound. Okay. And I can just drag that effect over to my new track, like that. And I'll delete this water sound, we don't need this now. So let's just listen to it here. We heard that twice because of the delay. That's the original. That's the second one. Now let's play around with that. If I click it again, it will bring that window back up, and we can have a look at some of these controls. So the feedback is right down at the moment. So if I bring the feedback up with a delay, that's going to tell us how many times we're going to hear that, right? Let's make the delay. Let's get rid of that. Put a little bit of a filter on it. Turn the feedback up. See what we get here. I'll turn the wet down a little bit. So we have that echo effect now, okay? And the feedback controls how long that effect goes on for. But the effect is only on that track. So if I make a copy, down here, this one won't have the effect on it, so it won't delay. Okay, so it's important to note. So if you have multiple tracks, you're going to need to copy that delay onto both tracks. Okay. Now there's plenty more effects that come built in with Reaper, and you can also include your own if you've got any, or if you have any, find any online, things like that. So I'll leave you to play around with those. For now, there's lots to be getting on with. I would encourage you to play around with some audio files and see how you can use these basic controls to manipulate sounds, to change the original sound into something new and something interesting. Now, at first, don't worry about making a composition. Don't worry about making a piece, and don't necessarily think about structure or form or all of those things. Right now, while you're getting used to this tool set, I want you to just think about the individual sounds and the ways that you can manipulate them and the ways that you can do interesting things to them. Now in the next session of these, we're going to look at stretching the sound and changing the pitch and changing the time of the sound. So for now, think about chopping them up, think about fading them, bringing in fragments of the sound or taking out fragments of the sound. Have a little play around with controlling the volume, maybe play around with some effects. There's also things like panning. So you see here, we have this pan control. That means I can pan left and right. If you're listening to on headphones at the moment, this should. So we have This panned to the left, we hear it in the left headphone. This panned to the right, we hear it in the right headphone or the right speaker. There's all kinds of things to play around with, but I've already given you quite a lot to be getting on with, so apologies if you're new to this and this has been quite overwhelming. I realise I've thrown a lot at you right at the start, so take some time, watch this video, work through it yourself with Reaper at your own speed. You can pause this video, stop it, play around, come back to it. It might take a little while for you to get used to this, but the important thing is just to kind of understand the basic principles, try them out yourself, have a play around, and slowly build up that confidence so that you can bring in your own sounds and start to manipulate them and find new and interesting and exciting things that you can do things with later, right? So that you can start to compose with this material. Okay, I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions, email me, and I look forward to showing you some more things to do with the DAW in future. Okay, thank you. Bye.